And like by just consistently, working at it, the results will come, but you can't let up on the habits that are going to create the results. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Real Estate Investors Club podcast. I have with me today an investor that I've been working with for a while, Chauntelle she lives in Calgary, but owns property in Montreal. And so we're just going to do a live coaching call today with a couple of Chauntele's questions. But by way of people getting to know you, why don't you just tell us, Chauntelle, what do you do? How did you start investing? And what are your plans?
Oh. Hello, everyone. How did I start investing? To be honest, I just fell into it. It was like my parents' property that I actually purchased because they were getting a little bit older. And so I just decided to step in. And so I just pretty much learn as I go, taking on this huge interest to say like I didn't know what I was doing or anything like that. And it's just learning as I go, pretty much. So.
And so do you have a plan of like where you'd like to go? I mean, I'm familiar with the project that you've done in Montreal with the triplex that you purchased from your mom. But what, do you have any projects to buy anything else? If you had a magic wand, where would you want to be with your investments in 5 years?
Ooh. Well, to be honest, I would love to. I guess Montreal is my home, so I would love to purchase another property in Montreal, but I would cater to more to like seniors, to be honest. I would just rent to seniors because I find they're the ones who are like, especially how things are going in terms of like inflation and cost of living has gone up. They're the ones who are being left behind. So if I had a unit to rent, I would just rent to seniors, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
That's my dream.
Okay. And maybe, Chauntelle, you want to just tell us what you do for work? Because I think it's relevant to the conversation.
Ooh. So I won't say the name of the organization, but basically I work with like low income families to try to find them like housing. And I also work with people who have like a lot of like mental health and addictions as well.
And that's in Calgary?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So that's a good place to start the conversation from. And so like you sent me a couple of questions that you wanted us to go over in today's session. So let me just start off with the first one. So the first one is, what advice do you have for a small time landlord who wants to evict a tenant? So lots of advice, but why don't you give me a little bit more information about what you want me to speak to? Because as you know, in Montreal, it's really, you can't just evict a tenant, right? Like, because we have the laws of the TAL, there's very specific situations under which you can evict somebody. So can you give me a bit more context for your question in terms of like, what kind of an eviction are we talking about?
Like, for example, if where somebody doesn't pay their rent, for example, and it's gone on for like 2 months or so, or if somebody comes in and they pretty much ruin your property, like they trash your unit, and let's just say police are involved, like, can you evict someone underneath those circumstances?
Okay. So those are two separate cases and I'll address them separately. So basically the only way that a landlord in Quebec can sort of lawfully or easily evict someone is if they don't pay. And so the magical number here is the 21st of the month. So if somebody is paying on the 15th, it's considered a late payment. But if they pay on the 22nd, it's considered a non-payment. And when a tenant falls into default, basically you can open a file at the TAL, which is the old régie, for expulsion for non-payment. And usually those kind of evictions are the easiest to carry out. If the tenant has not paid for about 6 weeks, you get your court date almost immediately. And if they don't pay at that time, like you're going to get your eviction very quickly. And in practice, I've only ever had to carry out in my career one actual eviction. All the other tenants who were in that situation left once they had the judgment. And then sort of a detail with that is if someone has been paying late consistently. So for example, sometimes I have tenants who like for 6 months pay the 15th, the 17th, the 20th. And then once they go over the 21st, you can then open a non-payment file with frequent lateness. And the frequent lateness, then you won't get the expulsion right away, but the judge will condemn the tenant to always pay on the first. And then if they don't pay on the first even once, then you can evict them because they didn't follow the judgment. So that's kind of a little trick if you have someone who's like consistently paying late. Like very often with those people, I'll go for the first time for non-payment. The first time they missed the date of the 21st, like I'll go and I know I won't evict them, but my goal is to get that judgment that they have to pay on the first. And in that case, one of two things happens. Either the behavior takes care of itself and they stop paying late because they have received the judgment that they have to pay on the first, or else they miss that and then you're able to evict if that's what you want to do. So like non-payment is really kind of the easiest thing. Now, with damages, with anything else, good luck. I can give you an example. My most recent eviction, which was the person we actually had to evict who had mental health issues, we evicted her for non-payment. But for 6 months, she had been slowly dismantling the unit because I think she thought there were bugs in the walls or something. And so she like took apart the bathroom wall. She was like showering like in a gaping hole that actually like went into the structure of the building. She started dismantling part of the kitchen. She was actually doing her business in bags, which she was then saving up in the bathroom. And, like this went on for 6 months. We had documented, the city came in to do like, unsanitary dwelling reports. The TAL, like we didn't even have a court case for that file by the time she was evicted for non-payment. So I got lucky. But like in terms of a tenant breaking stuff, like your best bet is going to be once they leave, you can go after them for damages. And like if you have proof and they have money, you will win. But to evict someone for that is very difficult.
In other words, not much recourse for landlords.
Not while the lease is enforced, because like basically once the person's renting from you, it's their dwelling. And even though you might be the owner of the building, the fact that they're sort of vandalizing the place or doing something, like unless they're doing something to cause damage to the building, like for example, I don't know, they like let the water run and then flood the whole building and then you have to pay for damage to other units. In that case, you might have some kind of recourse once the lease is enforced. But if they're just damaging the inside of their unit, you kind of have to wait for them to leave to go after them for that damage, because while they're in there, if they make holes in the walls, it's kind of their business. So that's the unfortunate truth, or at least the law here sees it that way. So your next question, I think, is a really good one, which is, what advice do you have for someone who wants to invest in Montreal with limited French? Is the person investing from out of the province, or is it like a local person who just has limited French?
Both, because I'll be honest, like I've had people ask me questions, like they're interested in Montreal. Montreal's a great city. They would like to invest, but they're afraid to because of the limited French that they have. So, but they're definitely interested in investing in Montreal.
So I mean, look, the truth is that in terms of investors on the ground here, there's lots of people who live here and invest here that don't speak very good French. I have clients who don't speak very good French, and they hire me partly because the tenants all speak French. But the truth of the matter of Montreal is that like most people are able to function in French, and are able to function in English. So if it's a question of like communicating with someone because there's a water leak, like if you speak to them in English, they might like respond to you in French, but like you'll be able to communicate with them. I think is the in the day-to-day stuff. Now, as far as official communications go, the Quebec government just has this law now that all of the official government communications so far from now on will only be in French. So you then are stuck doing, your contract renewals and your leases, and like those kind of communications do actually need to be officially in French. Now there are English versions of those documents, but if a tenant insists on it being in French, I I haven't had I haven't had a case where that's happened because we just communicate in French with people at my company.
Okay.
But I feel like if a tenant insists, you could have a problem there. But then you would need to have a friend or a paralegal or someone who can, or a property manager who can do your communications for you in French. Or else there are parts of the city where it's unlikely that you're going to have unilingual francophone tenants. Like, for example, your place is in LaSalle. If you invest in the West End, like the west part of the city, so Lachine, LaSalle, uh, the more anglophone boroughs, the chances that you have only most of your tenants probably will speak English.
Okay.
So that would be my advice. As far as for someone who is investing from out of province, um, I think the French is one kind of barrier, but I think the other major barrier legal environment here. And the fact of the matter is that the laws in Quebec are quite special. And if you are not familiar with the ecosystem here in terms of how our renting works, how our rental board works, I feel like that's a bigger problem than the linguistic problem, is just not knowing much about how the local system works. And then you need partners. Like, my advice is, if you're talking to people in Calgary who are like, okay, I have some money, I've heard that there's good returns to make in Montreal, like, how should I go about doing that? Well, you need partners on the ground here.
Mm.
Um, and at the very least, a very good property manager, but probably better to have to form partnerships.
And where would they find their partnerships? Like they just go online or?
Well, this is where networking comes in, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's partly the purpose of the organization that helps partner for this podcast, right? The Real Estate Investors Club. That's part of our mandate, right? Is we're a networking organization that holds monthly events. We are not super active, with a lot of virtual meetings. But for somebody who wants to, build a network here, if you came to a couple of events a year in Montreal, you could easily make some contacts, meet people, or go on Facebook groups, or you can reach out individually to people. I've had people, I do work with a fair amount of, I'd say 50% of my clients are out of province. And
Mm.
so I've met them, most of them physically, but for example, when I started managing your property, our relationship happened completely virtually. And that was before COVID. Um, so just the way that you reach out to various people, it's not that difficult to find people who are active and who have a presence and who do have partnerships with people. So if you look on Instagram or you look through an organization like ours, you will find all of the mentors in there are happy to sell coaching hours or to put you in touch with various people who do form partnerships. So I don't think it does take a little bit of legwork, because you have to kind of network, and then you have to find people that you want to work with. And the fit has to be right in terms of who you want to partner with. And so you might want to kiss a few frogs before you make a decision of who you want to get into business with.
Mhm.
um, but that process of meeting people virtually, it's never been easier than it is now.
Yeah.
Have you really been listening to the episode, or has your monkey mind been taking you off in one direction or another? Our mental habits can be our biggest assets or our biggest liabilities as we pursue certain goals. For me, the biggest performance gains have always come from training my mind. In my book, Mindful Landlord, I talk about how you can train your mind and how you can apply some of these strategies to your journey in the real estate field. The book is available on Amazon and also on its website, mindfullandlord.com. Now I'll stop evangelizing for the power of mental training and let you get back to the show. So now your next question: how do you make money as a real estate investor in a rent-controlled market? So you're a small landlord. You've had, we've had struggles adjusting your units to market rent. That's kind of a personal struggle, but it is an issue that people who invest in our market face. And the answer is that there's no silver bullet.
Mhm.
Um, there are various strategies of, offering to buy tenants out. Then there's doing your yearly increase to the maximum of your capacity to do it. But, rent control is rent control. And part of operating in a market where there is such heavy rent control, I mean, you can do cash for keys. That's what some people do. You can look to, create additional units. You can, renovate and get like a transformation permit from the city if they're willing to give it to you in the borough that you are. So for example, if you have like a very big 8.5 unit, but you might be able to split that into a 3.5 and a 5.5 or something. Like you might be able to break down the unit into smaller increments and then rent independently, and so repossess the dwelling in order to transform it. But there's really no silver bullet, and my advice is, if you it's in how you pick the assets in the first place. Because if your goal is, okay, I want to pick up a building where I'm going to be able to change the rents in a drastic way, well, when you're going through the shopping process, you need to make sure that either you're closing on something that has vacant units, or else the tenants are of a profile that are likely to leave in the next couple of years, so you're able to adjust it. If you have let's say an older woman who just turned 70, you can no longer repossess a dwelling, when you have a senior citizen in it. So she's gonna be there till she's 85. So unless she wants to move, like, why? And if it's rent controlled, why would she move? Because she's getting such a great deal. If they did move, um, they would have to pay way more money for a unit of comparable quality. And so, like, really, that's just kind of one of the things you have to build your financial predictions
Mhm.
to be able to cope with that, or else you have to buy properties that you're able to play with the rents.
Okay.
Did you have
Thank you.
any other like follow up with that, or does that answer your question?
No, that pretty much answers my question. Yeah.
Okay. So, how do you attract buyers to invest in Montreal, but they're turned off by rent control? um, so, I mean, I want to know what's behind this question, because like, I often speak to Americans or to people who are active outside of Montreal, and they're like, okay, what kind of how interesting are your returns? What are your property prices like? And the answer is, I mean, there's money to be made here. Like, there
Mhm.
are people here who are active, and um in a sense, because people are afraid and there are these barriers to entry into Quebec. There's the language, there's the legal system, there's the rent control. Like, people see those three things and they get so turned off. They're like, why would I go into that market if like, it sounds like a lot of headache. Why would I get in there?
Mhm.
And when you see a situation like that a lot of people don't want to get themselves involved in, it means that there's just less competition for the opportunities that exist.
Mhm.
And I think that's something that, like, we in Quebec are starting to see more, that people from outside of the province or outside of the country are coming into our market. Because you take, bigger places like Toronto or Vancouver, or probably to a lesser degree Alberta, like, those are markets where there's a lot of people who have already kind of bid things up and adjusted the rents to market. And if that's the case, like, there's kind of no value to be generated in those markets because everything's already maxed. Whereas, like, in Montreal, if you have good strategies, good partners, um, a smart way of operating, the amount of money that you can make in this market is, I think, superior to other places, just because of how you can operate the system here if you know how to do it. So
Mhm. That's the
that would
key.
be
Yeah.
that's the how can I say, that would be my pitch if I'm trying to attract someone here. But at the same time, like, do I really want to attract someone here? Like, maybe if I want to partner with them, but otherwise, like, if you have a well-kept secret, like, do you want to be broadcasting the well-kept secret around, when, it's someone like, for someone like me, it's my livelihood. And a lot of the other operators who do this, like, we're, happy to be in a place where there's not as much competition as other markets. So,
I see. Because the reason why I asked that question is because I have one or two friends who are they own properties here and they want to kind of like expand, and they're thinking, well, they're like, number one, Toronto's too expensive. They're like, oh, forget Toronto, but they're like Montreal. Because one of my friends been to Montreal, they like the city and everything like that, and so they're definitely thinking about investing in Montreal. But again, the turnoff is the rent control and the French, of course. Limited French, but they're definitely interested. So that's why I asked that
mhm,
question. Like, what advice would you give?
mhm. Well, yeah, I mean, I think, like, the truth is, if you're from out of province and you have no real, experience with the ecosystem here, at the very least, you need an excellent property manager, and it's probably better if you have a partner on the ground. But that some of those arrangements can actually, like, can work pretty well. I mean, that's partly my business, is I partner with people who have no interest in operating buildings, but they want someone who has some skin in the game, who's gonna take care of like making those units profitable as if they were their own units because they own some of the equity. So that would be my advice to your friends who want to get involved here, but don't want to deal with the headaches.
Yes. Because they ask me all the time, like, how do you do it? And I'm like, I don't know. I just do it. but I always refer to that site, the Régie de Logement, the website, and I kind of go and I actually read the rules, and that's quite, helpful, so always do the research as well too.
Yeah, and I mean, the reality is today there are so many resources, be it Google or Facebook groups or investor networks, like the power of the virtual world in the last, let's say, 15 years. Like somebody who was asking me this question 15 years ago, it would be more difficult back then than it is now because it's, if you want to self-educate, it's easy to do that. But and like Quebec aside, I think there's something to be said also about investing outside of your home market because that's like kind of underneath the question you're asking is nested that question. Because if you're investing outside of your home market, are you familiar with the legal environment? So like if you were, you're in Calgary, but you want to invest in like Red Deer or something, well, like, okay, that's the same Alberta environment. And so you're going to be familiar with whatever the rules are. If you have to go to court, presumably it's going to be in an environment you understand. But like, let's say I was investing in the States. I wouldn't have the arrogance to think that I know how to operate properly in that market. And so I need either to be surrounded by a very solid power team who has that knowledge until I can acquire it myself, or else I need partners. And I think that's true independent of like the English French thing. I think that's just the truth when you invest outside of your home market. You need boots on the ground. If you were to invest in Red Deer, you would need a local manager because you're not going to go up there every time you have a leaky faucet, but you might be able to get away with the legal environment. But if you're investing outside of, the zone that you're familiar with, from like a legal and business standpoint, you need to have a very good trusted team of advisors, if not a partner, who's going to kind of help you walk you through that till you become familiar enough to be able to operate in that environment yourself competently. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good.
Okay, Chauntelle. So we're at the end of the questions that you had for me today. Do you have any wild cards? Do you have any things of the moment that you want to pick my brain about? Well, because we have another 5 minutes left.
How do you keep the momentum going? How do you not get discouraged by, like, let's just say, if things are not going your way, like, you can't get the rent that you want. How do you keep the momentum going?
I mean, I think that's like that's a question that goes beyond the real estate field. I think that's a question of like, how do you keep your momentum going in life if you don't like the results you're getting?
Right.
And like, I mean, I have a great answer for that. You know, I have a theory about this, which is it's the showing up theory. And if you just keep doing the right things and showing up consistently, eventually the results will come. And a lot of the time that people, get disheartened and give up on something, they're this close, And I wrote an article a little while ago said that says life has no finish lines. And when you're running a race, okay, I have 5K, I have like 1 more kilometer to go, or like I'm in a match. I know like I have a 6 minutes to do, or I have 10 minutes to do. All right, I have 1 minute left. Like I only have to hold on for another minute. But like the reality is that life is not like that. You set your goals, you make a plan, and sometimes it could take you 10 years to hit a goal. Sometimes it could happen very quickly. And so like in terms of how you goal set, I'm experimenting now with more kind of habit goals as opposed to outcome goals, because ultimately the outcome is generated by the habits. So like I'll give you an example. If we put this into the real estate world, like let's say my goal is I want to acquire 2 more properties this year. But I only have a certain amount of money, and I want to pay a good price for those properties. Well, then the behavior that's going to lead to that happening successfully is I got to make offers. So like, how many offers do I want to make? I want to make an offer a week. I want to make an offer every 2 weeks. And like, even if they're lowball offers, like let me do it consistently And at some point, someone's going to say yes. Like, it's just a question of like repeating those behaviors diligently and not getting discouraged by the negative feedback, because the world's going to give you negative feedback. But if you're like consistently doing the right thing, one of those doors you knock on is going to open. And it's the same with partnerships, right? Like, at a certain point, if you want to be able to invest more, but you don't have either the capital or the borrowing capacity to do that on your own, then it becomes a question of like making partnerships that make sense, where you have something to offer the other person. And so how do you do that? Well, you network. And so you're like, okay, I want to buy another triplex this year, and I have this much money. I need to like have, let's say I have 30K, but I need 60K to do it. Okay, I need to find someone who's going to kick in 30K with me. What doors, what phone calls can I make? Who can I talk to that has 30K that might want to do this with me? Okay, let's make a list. Let's make one phone call like that every 2 days, every 3 days, every week, whatever it is. And like by just consistently, working at it, the results will come, but you can't let up on the habits that are going to create the results.
That's key.
Yeah. And so like, and don't get obsessed with the outcome. I think that's when people give up, is like they give up because they're like, oh man, I've been working so hard and it's taken me, 3 months and I have nothing to show for it. Well, yeah, but like maybe you just need to chip away for another week. Maybe you need to chip away for another year before it happens. But like ultimately, we don't live in a Instagram reality is not a reality. Like, we want to do stuff that's difficult. It takes hard work and it takes time. There's no way around that. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that. And so where can people find you, or to like network, or?
So like obviously Real Estate Investors Club, we have actually an event this week. Well, it's not going to be this week anymore by the time this episode airs, but we have monthly networking events, which you can find on our website. It's very easy to find me, Terrie Shower, Instagram, LinkedIn, my website, terrieshower.com. And Chauntelle, I want to thank you for taking this time to chat with our audience, chat with me, share some of the things that you're thinking about. I always appreciate the contribution of people who are willing to step out there, take the plunge, and come here and chat with me for half an hour so that the other people who are listening can profit from that. So shout out to you, Chauntelle.
Thank you, Terrie, and have a good day.
Thank you.